They didn't notice your intelligence when you were speaking. They noticed it when you stopped. At first, they underestimated you. Not aggressively, casually. You didn't fit their mental shortcut for someone who sees patterns early, understands motives quickly, or reads rooms before words are spoken. You were calm, observant, unimpressive on the surface, and that made you easy to misjudge. So they spoke freely. They explained things you already understood. They assumed authority where there was none. They revealed opinions, intentions, and weaknesses without realizing they were being observed. And you didn't interrupt. You didn't correct. You didn't rush to prove anything. That's what confused them later. Because intelligence, real intelligence, doesn't announce itself. It waits. It listens. It lets people expose themselves in comfort. The moment of realization never arrives loudly. It arrives as silence, a pause in their voice, a sudden carefulness in their words, a shift from confidence to restraint. They realize not consciously, but instinctively that you've been tracking everything, that you weren't behind the conversation. You were ahead of it. And once that awareness settles in, something changes permanently. People don't confront intelligence they didn't expect. They retreat from it. This is the moment the dynamic breaks. Not because you asserted dominance, but because awareness rearranged the hierarchy without permission. And from that moment on, nothing feels the same. If this feels familiar, stay with this video. Not to feel superior, but to understand why silence often follows awareness, and why real intelligence never needs to speak loudly to be felt. Underestimation is rarely hostile. It is casual. It arrives quietly, wrapped in assumptions, tone, and timing. People do not decide to underestimate you through logic. They do it through shortcuts. You didn't look the way they expected intelligence to look. You didn't speak with urgency. You didn't assert yourself early. So their mind filled the gap with something comfortable. This is how the opening is created. When someone assumes you are less aware than you are, they relax. They stop guarding their words. They simplify explanations. They reveal intentions without checking how they sound. They perform competence instead of verifying it. And all the while, you are not being tested. You are being overlooked. This is the advantage no one notices in real time. True intelligence does not rush to correct misconceptions. It observes them. It recognizes that being underestimated creates space. Space to listen without resistance. Space to gather information without scrutiny. Space to understand the emotional and psychological structure of the room. You are not quiet because you lack substance. You are quiet because you are collecting signal. Most people believe intelligence shows itself through contribution, through speaking, through asserting ideas early. But that belief is shaped by environments where visibility matters more than accuracy. In such spaces, speed is rewarded. Confidence is confused with clarity. Volume becomes proof. You did not play that game. So they placed you outside the hierarchy they were tracking. You were not competition. You were not a threat. You were background. And that background position allowed you to see the entire structure. While they focused on who was speaking the most, you noticed who controlled the direction of conversation. While they debated facts, you noticed emotional investments. While they defended positions, you noticed insecurity beneath certainty. This is the phase where intelligence stays invisible by choice. You didn't interrupt when they explained things you already knew. You didn't challenge weak logic immediately. You didn't reveal how far ahead you were thinking. Not because you were unsure, but because there was no advantage in revealing it yet. Underestimation keeps people honest. It makes them careless in the best possible way. They reveal priorities. They expose blind spots. They show how they behave when they think they are not being evaluated. This is why intelligence often feels delayed to others. They assume awareness is happening in real time, when in reality, it has been accumulating quietly for much longer. The mistake people make is believing intelligence announces itself at the moment it forms. In truth, it announces itself at the moment it becomes unavoidable. Before that moment, it waits. You may have noticed something during this phase. A pattern. People spoke over you without consequence. They summarized your thoughts before you finished them. They assumed leadership without confirmation. And you allowed it. Not out of submission, out of calibration. You were mapping personalities, measuring consistency, watching how people responded when challenged by others. You noticed who doubled down, who deflected, who softened, who dominated. These details mattered more than being right in the moment. Because intelligence is not about winning conversations. It is about understanding systems. And systems reveal themselves when no one thinks they are being observed. There is a specific kind of silence that comes from this position. It is not awkward, it is attentive. It does not withdraw energy. It concentrates it. You are present without needing to be visible. People often mistake this silence for disengagement. They assume you are uninterested or passive. That assumption reinforces their behavior. They speak more freely. They fill the space. They become comfortable. This comfort is what exposes them. Over time, a strange asymmetry develops. You know far more about them than they know about you. Not because you hid, but because they never looked closely. They spoke as if you weren't tracking context. They behaved as if you wouldn't remember patterns. They assumed you wouldn't connect dots later. This is the cost of underestimation. Eventually, there comes a moment small, almost invisible, where you respond differently. Not louder, not aggressively, just precisely. You reference something from earlier. You ask a question that reframes the entire situation. You point out a contradiction without emphasis, and the room shifts. Not dramatically, subtly. They pause. They reconsider. They realize something has been happening without their awareness. That you were not behind. You were parallel. Watching. Processing. This is not the moment of silence yet. This is the precursor. The realization begins to form that you were never where they placed you. That their mental model of you was incomplete. And incomplete models are destabilizing. People rely on hierarchy to feel oriented. When someone they categorized as minor reveals unexpected depth, the hierarchy flickers. Not collapses, but destabilizes. They begin replaying past interactions, reinterpreting moments, rethinking tone. And with each reinterpretation, certainty weakens. This is why underestimation often leads to discomfort later. It forces a retroactive correction. They must now reconcile how much they revealed while assuming you didn't notice. You did notice. Not with judgment, with clarity. And this is where intelligence stops being invisible. Not because you changed, but because the environment can no longer ignore the mismatch between who you are and who they thought you were. The opening closes here. What replaces it is tension, awareness, restraint, and soon after that, silence. But that silence does not come yet. First, there is recalibration. Silence does not arrive suddenly. It develops the way pressure does, slowly, invisibly, until it changes behavior. After the initial realization begins, people do not immediately withdraw. They adjust, they test. They watch you more closely than before, trying to re-establish orientation. This is the recalibration phase. At first, they speak more carefully. Sentences shorten. Jokes lose their edge. Opinions soften or become vague. Where there was once confidence, there is now caution. They are not afraid of you. They are afraid of misjudging you again. This is important to understand. The silence that follows intelligence is not caused by intimidation. It is caused by uncertainty. People are comfortable around those they believe they understand. When that understanding collapses, so does ease. You have become unpredictable in the most destabilizing way. not emotionally, but cognitively. They can no longer assume how you will respond. They no longer know what you see, what you connect, what you notice. And because they underestimated you once, they are now aware that their internal map of you is flawed. Humans rely heavily on these maps. We classify others quickly, so we know how to act around them. When a classification fails, the mind pauses. It hesitates. Silence fills that pause. You may notice the change in small details. Eye contact becomes brief. Conversations feel restrained. People check your reactions before finishing a thought. They explain less, but also reveal less. Where once they filled space, they now guard it. This is not respect in the traditional sense. It is recalibration. They are rebuilding a model of you. The discomfort comes from time. They need more of it now. Time to observe. Time to reassess. Time to feel safe again. And silence buys them that time. From your side, this can feel strange. You did not announce a boundary. You did not confront anyone. You did not demand acknowledgement. Yet the dynamic has shifted. This is what happens when intelligence becomes visible without being performed. People often believe silence is punishment, that someone is withholding. In reality, silence is often a defense mechanism. It creates distance while the psyche reorganizes. You are no longer easy to categorize. That matters more than being impressive. Once someone realizes you see patterns they missed, conversations lose their casual quality. Words feel heavier. Statements feel riskier. There is a new awareness that what is said will be remembered, contextualized, and perhaps understood more deeply than intended. This awareness changes behavior. Some people respond by becoming quieter themselves. They speak less around you, choosing safety over expression. Others respond by becoming performative, trying to reassert their position through confidence or expertise. Both responses stem from the same root: loss of assumed superiority. Silence is the most common response because it requires the least energy. You may also notice a shift in how often people seek your opinion. Before, they may have overlooked it. Now, they either ask deliberately or avoid asking altogether. Both indicate the same recognition. Your perspective carries weight. Weight creates pressure. Pressure creates restraint. This is where the phrase "everything changed" becomes accurate. Not because of a dramatic event, but because the social rhythm no longer flows naturally. Interactions become measured, less spontaneous, more cautious. You did not create this tension intentionally. It emerged as a consequence of awareness. There is another layer to this silence that is rarely discussed. It is internal. People begin replaying moments when they spoke too freely. They remember explaining things you already knew. They recall dismissing your input or talking over you. These memories surface with new meaning. Regret does not always show itself as apology. Often, it shows itself as withdrawal. Silence protects them from confronting that discomfort. From your perspective, this can feel isolating. The room feels colder. Conversations feel thinner. There is less engagement. It may even feel like you did something wrong. You didn't. What you did was remove illusion. Illusion makes people comfortable. It allows them to relax into assumed roles. When illusion breaks, authenticity is required. Not everyone is prepared for that. This is why silence often follows awareness instead of dialogue. Dialogue would require acknowledging the misjudgment. Silence avoids it. You may feel tempted to fill the gap, to soften the tension, to reassure others that you are still approachable, that nothing has changed. Something has changed. And trying to undo it would mean shrinking yourself back into a role that no longer fits. Quiet power does not rush to restore comfort. It allows recalibration to complete itself. This phase tests patience. It asks you to remain steady without feedback, to tolerate distance without explanation, to trust that the shift is not a rejection, but an adjustment. Some people will recalibrate successfully. They will learn to interact with you more honestly, with fewer assumptions. These relationships often become cleaner, more respectful. Others will not. For them, silence hardens. Engagement fades. Distance becomes permanent. Not because of conflict, but because the old dynamic is no longer possible, and a new one feels threatening. This is not loss. It is sorting. When intelligence changes a dynamic, it reveals compatibility. Some people can adapt. Others cannot. Silence is the sorting mechanism. It creates space where truth settles. And once that settling completes, the final phase begins. Silence eventually stops being temporary. It settles. What began as recalibration hardens into a new baseline. And this is where the meaning of the silence changes. It is no longer hesitation. It is confirmation. By now, they have understood what they needed to understand. They have watched how you move without filling space. They have noticed that you do not rush to restore comfort. They have seen that you do not chase conversation, validation, or reassurance. And in that observation, a conclusion forms. You are not dependent on the dynamic that once centered them. This realization matters more than intelligence itself. Many people can tolerate intelligence. What they struggle with is independence of perception. The moment they sense that you do not need their agreement to remain stable, the relational equation shifts again. Silence, at this stage, becomes respect or retreat. There is no middle ground. Those who choose respect approach differently now. Their tone is measured. Their engagement is intentional. They do not speak to fill space. They speak to add meaning. They listen more closely. They pause before responding. The interaction slows down, not because of fear, but because they now recognize depth. These relationships often improve. They lose casual dominance, but gain mutuality. They become less performative and more precise. There is less noise and more substance. You are no longer someone they talk at. You are someone they consider. This is one outcome. The other outcome is withdrawal. Some people experience your silence as exposure. It reflects back their earlier assumptions, their careless words, their unexamined behavior. Being around you now feels like being seen too clearly. Not judged, but visible. And visibility is uncomfortable for those who rely on performance. For them, silence becomes distance. They stop initiating. They avoid deeper conversations. They keep interactions surface level or eliminate them entirely. Not out of anger, but self-preservation. The dynamic no longer serves their internal narrative. This is where many misunderstand what is happening. They assume silence means rejection, that they have been excluded, that you are punishing them by withholding engagement. But silence, in this context, is not an action. It is a result. You are no longer adjusting yourself to maintain harmony. Harmony that required self-reduction was never sustainable. This phase often reveals something subtle about intelligence that is rarely articulated. Intelligence does not demand recognition. It creates conditions. And when those conditions change, behavior follows naturally. You did not announce a boundary. You did not correct their assumptions directly. You did not prove anything. You simply remained consistent. Consistency is destabilizing to those who expected adaptation. People who relied on you to mirror them, soften them, or make them feel certain now face themselves without buffer. Some rise to that challenge. Others step away. Both responses are information. This is also the phase where you may notice an internal shift. The need to be understood fades. The urge to clarify diminishes. You stop replaying interactions in your mind, wondering if you should have said more or less. Silence teaches you something important. You do not owe coherence to those who misread you. Your responsibility is not to manage others' interpretations. It is to remain aligned with your own. As this settles, a new kind of confidence emerges. Not expressive confidence, but structural confidence. You trust your perception. You trust your timing. You trust your restraint. This trust changes how you show up everywhere. You speak when there is something worth saying. You remain quiet when silence carries more weight. You no longer feel pressure to perform intelligence. You let it be inferred or not. This is the quietest form of power. It does not argue for space. It occupies it naturally. People sense this even when nothing is said. They feel it in pauses, in eye contact that is calm rather than searching, in responses that are precise rather than excessive. This is why silence at this stage is not empty. It is dense. It carries accumulated observation, unspoken understanding, and resolved self-positioning. Others may not know exactly what changed, but they feel that something has, and they respond accordingly. The environment reorganizes itself around you. Conversations become shorter or deeper. Interactions become fewer or more meaningful. There is less waste, less noise, less confusion. This is not because you demanded better. It is because you stopped compensating for less. Intelligence, when paired with restraint, becomes a filter. It allows alignment and discourages intrusion. It attracts those who value clarity and repels those who thrived on assumption. This is why the silence does not feel lonely for long. It feels clean. You realize that much of the noise you tolerated before was never connection. It was familiarity. And familiarity often disappears when illusion does. What remains is simpler, fewer people, clearer exchanges, more space. And in that space, you recognize the final truth of this shift. They did not change because you spoke louder. They changed because you stopped needing to be heard. That is when intelligence stops being underestimated. Not when it announces itself, but when it no longer requires response. A final shift does not announce itself. There is no conversation that marks it. No visible moment where everything clicks into place. It arrives quietly, through absence, through what no longer happens, through what no longer needs to. By now, the silence around you is no longer reactive. It has settled into understanding. People have stopped waiting for you to explain yourself. They have stopped testing the edges. They have accepted, consciously or not, that the version of you they once interacted with is no longer accessible. This is where the real change lives. Not in how they see you, but in how you move. You no longer enter rooms anticipating how you will be perceived. You no longer adjust your tone to preempt misunderstanding. You no longer prepare explanations in advance. The mental energy that once went toward managing perception has returned to you, and that return creates stillness. Stillness is often misread as passivity. In reality, it is resolution. It is what happens when internal conflict ends. You are no longer deciding whether to speak or stay silent. Silence is no longer a strategy. It is simply what remains when nothing needs to be proven. This is the stage where intelligence becomes embodied. It is no longer something you use. It is something you are. People sense this embodiment immediately. They may not name it, but they feel the difference. Conversations with you feel grounded, less chaotic, less performative. There is a sense that nothing needs to be rushed or exaggerated. Some find this calming. Others find it unsettling. Calm presence reflects inner state. When someone is comfortable with themselves, they do not create noise to fill gaps. They do not over-explain. They do not seek alignment through persuasion. They allow things to be as they are. This makes certain dynamics impossible. You are no longer drawn into debates meant to establish dominance. You are no longer pulled into emotional spirals that rely on reaction. You are no longer positioned as an audience for insecurity disguised as confidence. This is why some people disappear at this stage. Not because you pushed them away, but because there is nothing left for them to extract. Access was the currency before. your attention, your reassurance, your engagement. When those are no longer freely available, the exchange ends. What replaces it is not emptiness. It is selectivity. You begin choosing environments that can meet you where you are. You gravitate toward conversations that have substance, not just motion. You value precision over volume, meaning over momentum. This refinement does not feel dramatic. It feels natural, like shedding weight you didn't realize you were carrying. You may look back and notice how much effort you once invested in being understood, how often you soften insights so others wouldn't feel challenged, how frequently you explained obvious things just to keep peace. That effort is gone now, not because you became indifferent, but because you became aligned. Alignment is quiet. It does not argue for itself. It does not justify its presence. It simply exists, and what does not fit falls away on its own. This is why the final silence feels different from the earlier ones. It is not tense. It is not uncertain. It is spacious. You are no longer waiting for someone to realize your intelligence. That realization has already happened where it needed to, and where it didn't, it no longer matters. The need for recognition dissolves when self-recognition is complete. This is the part most people misunderstand. They assume the end goal is being seen, being acknowledged, being respected. But those are external confirmations. They fluctuate. They depend on others' capacity to perceive clearly. What you have reached is internal confirmation. You know what you see. You trust how you think. You respect your timing. That trust removes urgency from your life. You are not in a hurry to correct misconceptions. You are not concerned with being underestimated. You understand now that underestimation is temporary, but alignment is lasting. Those who can meet you in clarity will find you. Those who cannot will drift. Neither outcome requires effort. This is where everything truly changes. Not in the reactions around you, but in the absence of reaction within you. Silence is no longer something you endure. It is something you inhabit. It becomes the space where insight lives, where decisions are made, where direction forms without pressure. You realize that much of what you once called connection was noise, familiarity, habit, expectation. And when that falls away, what remains feels lighter, even if fewer. You are not isolated. You are unburdened. The intelligence they didn't expect was never meant to impress them. It was meant to free you from the need to be understood on someone else's timeline. And now that freedom is quiet, complete, and unmistakable, nothing needs to change from here, because it already has. If this didn't feel like motivation, that's intentional. Real shifts don't arrive with noise. They arrive as relief. You don't need to prove what you see. You don't need to correct who misread you. You don't need to speak where silence already carries meaning. If this resonated, stay here. This channel isn't about being impressive. It's about becoming unmistakable without saying a word.